Today I'm going to be documenting a very interesting and important journey in the history of Nottingham Forest FC. The takeover of Evangelos Marinakis. No. He took over Nottingham Forest. He didn't take over himself. Let's start again. The takeover of Nottingham Forest by Evangelos Marinakis. That makes more sense, doesn't it? He bought the club off Faraz Al-Hassari, who was a nutcase. Thankfully, because that bloke, he bought the club in 2012. Every year it went downhill significantly, and ultimately we survived relegation by 2 goals by beating Ipswich 3-0 on the last day. 2 goals from Britta Sombalonga and a great strike from Chris Cohen as well. Ultimately meant that we survived at the expense of Blackburn. So there was quite a lot of joy going into the new season. The Forest finally had a competent owner, or so we thought. This guy is the owner of Olympiakos, one of the biggest clubs in Greece, probably the biggest. So surely he was going to have the minerals to get this club out of the Championship. It wasn't just Marinakis that would join Forest in this takeover. Nicholas Randall would join as the chairman. Ioannis Vestros, probably saying his name slightly wrong, but quite frankly he deserves it because he was not good at his job. He joined as the Forest CEO, formerly being the Olympiakos CEO. One thing that I, at the time and many times since, thought about this takeover was this. He is the owner of Olympiakos. His expectations are completely different to what they're going to have to be to try and get Forest promoted. We're not a team that is by far the best team in our division. We're not in the top division. And this is a Forest side that many years before Marinakis have been in the Championship for already, not just the Championship, but outside the Premier League for 18 years. So could he have the minerals? Would he be able to do it? One thing that must be mentioned about Marinakis at the time in particular, and even to this day as well, his alleged involvement in drug trafficking and match fixing. These are pretty serious allegations, and in 2019 Marinakis was actually fined for these allegations, so that would suggest to you that he actually did do what was being alleged that he did do. That was a mouthful, wasn't it? Ultimately this season had to be just about stability, getting the club back going again, getting it in some kind of order, making sure that his own men were doing their jobs correctly and sorting out the squad, because going into the season the squad, well, it just survived relegation, so it couldn't have been anything special. And Michael Mansfield was in the back line, who quite frankly was, in my opinion anyway, not very good at football. It's worth pointing out that new contracts were given to youth players, the likes of Joe Wall, Ryan Yates and Alex Myton. Wonder what would happen to those three a few years later. The club did not hold back in the transfer market either in the summer, signing 8 players. Unfortunately, they did lose Britta Sombalonga for 15 million to fellow Championship side Middlesbrough, which didn't really make any sense because they were in the same division as us. The season would start quite well with a 1-0 win against Millwall to start the season, with brand new signing Marinakis scoring, but ultimately we fast forward all the way to the end of 2017 and the club are not really any further forward than where they were a year beforehand. We were mid-table in 14th place, 11 points off the playoffs. The best moments really were 4-0 win against QPR, which back then was incredibly rare that Forest scored that amount of goals. Kieran Dow scoring a hat-trick away at Hull in a 3-2 win, and a 3-2 win at home against Bolton Wanderers, in which Joe Wall scored his first goal for the club. With the worst lows being a 2-0 defeat away at Derby, being 1-0 down within 24 seconds. A 3-2 defeat away at Reading. What a surprise, we went away to Reading and we didn't win. And the final nail in the coffin for Mark Warburton was a 1-0 defeat at home to bottom side Sunderland. This led to him being sacked and being replaced by Aitor Karanka. Just a few days before Karanka came in, Forest had beaten Arsenal 4-2 in the FA Cup. Reference right here, very handy that, to be honest. But unfortunately, not really much happened in the early stages of Karanka's tenure, losing 4 games out of his first 5, his first one being against Aston Villa at home, losing 1-0. The one game that we didn't lose in that time, in typical Forest fashion, was a 2-0 win away at Molineux against Wolves. A Wolves side stacked with money, walking the league. One thing that must be mentioned was the 3-0 defeat at home to Preston, in which Michael Mansfield didn't play football very well, and this led to just 2 days later Forest signing 10 players on the same day. The biggest names being Joe Lolly from Premier League side Huddersfield, Ben Watson, Adlen Guardiola coming back to the club, Tobias Figueiredo and Jack Colback signing on loan. One thing that must be mentioned is Matt Mills's exit. He said recently on the Under the Cosh podcast, a great podcast by the way, go and check it out, only it's quite sweary so I'm not going to put a clip in, but he mentioned how he left and the dealings that he had with a certain Ioannis Vestros. As I mentioned, he wasn't very good at the CEO role at Forest. Vestros went up to Mills after this Preston match and just quite simply said to him, "You're terrible, get out." I think this was a clear indication that at least in the early days, they were approaching it in the wrong way, the Greeks. Their expectations of managing Olympiacos were totally different to Forest. The rest of the season was rather mediocre, a 17th place finish in the end for Forest. I want to mention their 7-match unbeaten run, which featured 4 goalless draws, and then immediately after we beat QPR 5-2, I think actually we played Birmingham after that, but the point is we scored 5 goals. We then proceeded to not score for 10 straight hours, which I think is really funny, quite frankly. Like, that's the most Forest thing I've ever heard. And then, just to put the icing on the cake, we ended that goalless run by scoring 2 goals in the space of 5 minutes. Going into this season, again, it was all about trying to progress from the last season, and the fans could quite clearly sense that something was happening because it was the highest average attendances at a City ground this season since 1996. We also noticed a few little changes around the ground as well. We look at the Brian Clough stand initially, the top bit was white with red text. It was the other way around now, which looks a lot better, quite frankly. When it comes to transfers, we went even more mental, a lot more ambitious than the year before. Gil Diaz, a Portuguese winger, joining on loan from Monaco. And the biggest one really, João Carvalho joining the club for a record fee, £13 million from Benfica, also with Diego Gonçalves joining him at the same time. Club legend Michael Dawson would also return to the club, Jack Robinson, Hidal Sudani, Jack Colback would also come back again on loan, and the biggest one really besides Carvalho in terms of transfer fee, Lewis Grabban would join from Bournemouth. We fast forward all the way to the 1st of December this season and Forest have only lost 2 games this season. That was against Brentford on the 6th game of the season and Norwich at home in October. Of course, Norwich, being Norwich, they were top of the league, so it's not too bad that. Some significant results would have been a win against Sheffield Wednesday at home, which Jack Carvalho would score his first goal for the club, wins away at Borough and Bolton, also a win against playoff rivals Sheffield United at home, 1-0, a great performance. Not to mention, one of the craziest games probably of all time, a 5-5 draw away at Aston Villa, in which Joe Lee scored this absolute thunderbolt, and I could mention even more than that. However, December went quite bad because we ended up losing 3 games and drawing 2. One of those games that we drew was a 3-3 draw away at Norwich when we were cruising away from home against the league leaders, 3-0 with 15 minutes to go, and yeah, we decided to just not win basically. It would have been a bit harsh to get rid of Karanka, but ultimately Marinakis said to him that you must be in the top 6 by the end of the year, and he was 7th. And that was not good enough. So in comes club legend Martin O'Neill. Not the most exciting manager in terms of style of play. He had had success before as a manager, but it was quite baffling really. We don't really know why we got to Karanka because we didn't actually really improve. We arguably got worse. In terms of January signings, we'd signed the likes of Karim and Saifad, who actually joined in the November on a free transfer. Johan Belaluan was signed from Leicester, who would ultimately go on to score the winning goal a month later against obviously arch rivals Derby, who I don't know where they are these days. And Alex Milosevic would also join out of nowhere. We don't have a clue who he was, but I'll just say this, he ended up being a bit of a cult hero in a very short space of time. So this is now the 3rd manager in just 2 seasons, not even 2 seasons either, and it would start with a 1-0 defeat at home to Bristol City, and that would really sum up how Martin O'Neill's tenure would go, rather underwhelming. He'd get his first win at home in the very next game against Wigan, in which Matty Cash and Adlen Guardiola would score 2 great goals. And youth player Ryan Yates would get his first popper going in the first team under Martin O'Neill, so I'm sure Yatesy will thank him for that. Yates would score his first goal for the club in the 2-2 draw away at West Brom, in which we were totally and utterly robbed by the officials, and it's an absolute disgrace. Only a few weeks after that West Brom draw, Forest announced that they would be rebuilding the Peter Taylor stand, increasing the stadium capacity by 8,000 people, ultimately making it 38,000 seater stadium, the biggest stadium in the East Midlands. But unfortunately, due to future events, in 2020 mainly, this would not end up happening to the present day. By the end of March, Forest playoffs hopes were rather slim, but we beat Swansea 2-1 at home with 2 late goals from Daryl Murphy and Mulawage, who had a very short period at the club, but did pretty well for themselves. But ultimately, we then decide to lose the next 4 matches and just completely and utterly throw away our chances of getting the top 6. And that meant that a 9th place finish would be where we would come the end of the season. We would end the season with 3 straight wins, namely the biggest one being against Middlesbrough, where Jack Carvalho stole the show. But ultimately, it was a year of progress, 100%, but we did miss out on the top 6. Immediately, before pre-season had even really properly got going, Martin O'Neill would be fired and replaced by a random French manager, Stabilising. And I say replaced, blink and you'll miss it. 18 minutes later, Stabilising was appointed. No one had a clue who he was, and there was 0 reports or rumours that O'Neill was even going to get fired. The likes of Sammy Amiobi would join on a free from Bolton just 4 days before O'Neill's firing. And the likes of Thiago Silva, Yuri Ribeiro and Alpha Semedo would join. We're noticing a theme there, 3 Portuguese players. We did that last season as well, so are we just trying to sign the whole of Portugal and just copy what Wolves did? I've just realised Lewis Gavin's head's completely cut up. That's made no difference. We'd signed 2 goalkeepers, Aro Muric and Brice Samba would also join the club. The biggest signing of the summer really was Joe Wall coming back from Rangers after... Did I even mention that he left? No, I don't think I did actually. Okay, so Joe Wall had been on loan the year before. I'm sure, how did I not mention it? It's written right here, David. We would see the likes of Ben Osborne go to Sheffield United really without no say from Stabilising, the likes of Daryl Murphy, Adelaide Guardiola, Ivan Apaya and Alex Milosevic would also go. Milosevic, an absolute travesty that we got rid of him because he was a great defender. Aro Muric was going to be the #1 goalkeeper going into this season on loan from Man City. If it wasn't for him dropping 2 absolute disaster classes, particularly against West Brom. Despite losing that West Brom game, Forest would then go on to not lose for the next 11 matches, the biggest wins really being against Birmingham, a 3-0 win, beating Stoke 3-2 away, ultimately a game in which we very, very briefly were top of the Championship, and also a win away at newly relegated Fulham, a 2-1 win, a fantastic performance in which we scored one of the best team goals you can ever wish to see. Sabry's football was not stunning to watch by any means at all, but it got results a lot more often than previous managers had managed to do, and he quite quickly was forming a very strong bond with the fans. Ultimately, this unbeaten run did end with 2 back-to-back defeats against Wigan and Hull, but we picked up again by beating the likes of Derby, a small club like them, so it's something too impressive, and a massive win away at QPR. And what seemed like an annual thing at this stage, Forest completely falling apart in the month of December by not winning for 5 straight games, 3 of them being defeats. The worst one being a 4-0 defeat at home to Sheffield Wednesday. Insert clip of me being really cringy and salty. We just lost 4-0 at home. All the goals in the first half. We just lost 4-0 at home, yes. Not saying I'm not cringy now, because I probably still am, but yeah, I was a lot worse back then. We did pick up again though, 7 straight games without defeat, biggest one being a 3-1 win against Luton, in which Joe Lolly played an absolute blinder, also scoring a winner only a few days later against Brentford. The transfer window told us exactly how the season was going to end. Gartang Bong, Adama Carby, who was absolutely dreadful, and Nuno da Costa all joined. We would get rid of Jack Robinson, Albert Adoma and Chema. All 3 players better than the ones we bought in. However, besides beating Leeds 2-0 at home, in which Leeds fans like to remind us that we didn't actually get promoted ultimately, as well as beating fellow playoff rivals Cardiff away from home, a ground that we wouldn't typically win at down the years either, it really didn't end very well, to be honest. Defeats to Charlton and Millwall before the COVID-19 lockdown would really signal the way the season was going to end. When we did come back after lockdown, we started it pretty well by beating Bristol City and Huddersfield, But after that, God knows what happened. Going into the final day of the season against Stoke City, Forest had not won for 5 straight matches. Forest had to get a point to confirm the playoffs. Swansea City had to beat our goal difference to stand any chance, especially if we won. So Forest decided to lose 4-1 and Swansea decided to win 4-1, and you guessed it, we bottled the playoffs despite being in it the entire season pretty much.
We've capitulated. We have capitulated.
That made every Forest fan cry for quite a long time, because especially what happened in the next season, it just got even worse. Would re-sign Jack Cole back permanently after being on loan a year beforehand. Would also go on to sign Scott McKenna from Aberdeen, who would be amazing, even in a very poor season. I mean, I'm telling you exactly how the season's going to go, but you know ultimately how it went. PSG youngster Loic Mbeso would join, as well as Lyle Taylor. Cyrus Christie and Anthony Knockaert would join from Fulham. Harry Arter had also been promoted with Fulham as well. Cafu would join from Olympiacos, and that is just a few of 14 signings that joined the club. The biggest outgoings being Matty Cash and Ben Watson. We did not replace either of them. Youngster Brennan Johnson would also join Lincoln City in League One on loan for this season. Would lose the first 4 games in the league, as well as a game in the League Cup against Barnsley, only scoring 2 goals in the process. This ultimately, quite sadly, would see the end of Sabri Lamouchi, despite the fact that overall it appeared like he was going to be the one to get us back up. It could not really have gone any worse for him. Maybe the lack of fans in the stadiums because of COVID, of course, did play a part. Maybe it was the lack of understanding from the Greek owners, the insane transfer window that we had, ultimately a significantly shorter turnover in seasons because of the break in the previous one. There was so much that caused this demise, really. And as I mentioned, a massive hangover. It took us a long time to get over it, so we decided to make it even worse for ourselves by appointing Chris Hughton as the manager. At the time, Chris Hughton had some incredible plaudits. A lot of people were saying, and including me, this is a great appointment. This guy's been promoted more than anyone besides Neil Warnock, the second best record ever in the Championship. We've got a good one here, surely. Surely this guy's going to get us up. He's kept teams in the Premier League as well, with Brighton, Norwich, Newcastle. He's kept all of them in the Premier League. This is the guy, surely. Right? No, we'll go on to not lose any of the first 4 matches, but probably have the most underwhelming unbeaten run you can possibly think of. We would then win 2 in a row against 2 newly promoted sides in Coventry City and Wickham, and both of them were good performances. Actually, genuinely, I can't even complain about them. Lyle Taylor would be the star of both of those games, with his incredibly nervy but very cool penalty taking technique. Then came one of the most depressing periods I've ever had supporting this club. A 7-game winless run, 6 of them being defeats. And we scored just 2 goals in the process. One of them being a 1-0 defeat at home to Steve Cooper's Swansea. Wonder how he'll get on as a manager down the years. And the worst one really being a 3-1 defeat at home to Brentford. And this is the thing, right? We weren't doing well, but we weren't really getting battered at all, besides this game against Brentford. And the body language of the players said it all. And Joe Wall came out after that game as captain, and he made a statement, and I don't blame him, because he went absolutely mental. It was also around this time that a lot more rumours were coming out about Ioannis Vestros, about his dealings with players, the fact that ultimately he made most of these signings that ultimately were failing quite badly. However, it did appear like Wall's words after that game against Brentford did seem to make an impact, because for the next 15 matches would only lose 2 games. Now, it wasn't the most spectacular unbeaten run, there were quite a few draws in there, but we weren't losing. We even scored 3 goals under Chris Hughton. In the transfer window, we signed 3 new players: James Garner, Filip Karinovic, and Glenn Murray, Garner being a standout player. Ultimately though, after that resurgence of form, it did go downhill again. Forest proceeding to do the complete opposite and only win 2 of the remaining 14 matches. Granted, not as many defeats, but it wasn't glamorous at all, and we ultimately came 17th. So this is 17th, 9th, 7th, back down to 17th again. Following the disappointment of the previous year, we just all hoped that we could just get back on track Most people were saying we were going to get mid-table again, but better than 17th. However, the early stages were very encouraging. We knew that we were going to have fans back in the stadium again, and immediately 27,000 average attendance would be throughout the entire season. We saw Nicholas Randall being appointed as part of the EFL board. Dame Murphy, a brand new chief executive, joining. You guessed it, replacing Ioannis Vestros. The poison was removed. So would we see improvements? That was all pretty encouraging. Unfortunately, Murphy did come in late. He came in the middle of July, meaning that he couldn't instantaneously sign players. So by the start of the season, the squad was looking rather thin. So the only negative thing really here was the manager. But I think fairly, he was given a chance under, having crowds back, having a brand new chief executive, all of what I just mentioned. Would it click for Houghton? The only players that would have going into the first day of the season against Coventry, ultimately losing 2-1, were Ethan Horvath and Philip Zinkernagel. This meant that we didn't have any fullbacks essentially. We didn't have Christie, we sold Ribeiro. After a few more defeats in the league, Dame Murphy finally could actually sign players. Now he was settled. The likes of James Garner came back on loan from Man United. Jed Spence, Max Lowe also came in on loan as fullbacks. However, despite these signings, even with Jed Spence and Max Lowe in there, and Zinkernagel being a regular feature now, Garner back in the team, it still wasn't working. So there's all this good going on. What is the problem? We're still losing games. Game week 7, 2-0 defeat to Middlesbrough. Worst start in 108 years. We've got a really genuinely good, exciting team. Brennan Johnson is also back from his loan from Lincoln. Why are we struggling? I know, the manager, he played the most depressing, boring, underwhelming, demoralising football imaginable, and thank the Lord he was sacked on the 16th of September, and then came Steve Cooper. Now I can do this video with a smile on my face continuously. Instantaneously, we saw positivity and optimism from Steve Cooper, ex-Swansea manager, the manager that overtook Forest a few years ago in the playoffs, beat us 3 times last season in the FA Cup and League. So he knew what he was doing. He'd never ever finished outside the Championship playoffs before. He'd bring his assistant manager Alan Tate, and Stephen Reid would stay on, having been the previous assistant manager, and he would see out the next game against Huddersfield Town, in which Forest switched to a 3 at the back formation with wing backs, and Forest won 2-0 and played genuinely exciting football. Cooper's first game though would be a 1-1 draw at home to Millwall, and it wasn't anything spectacular, but there was potential there, there was definite potential there in that performance. But then it really did click. Immediately it clicked. The next 2 games, a 3-1 win away at Barnsley and a 3-0 win away at Birmingham. The Barnsley game we were losing, we changed the tactics, we changed the shape of the team, and we won with ease. Jed Spence was immediately a catch in the eye at right wing back, scoring in that Birmingham game. Ryan Yates looked a different player, forward thinking all the time, positive and full of passion like the entire team suddenly was. We also scored with Lewis Graven. Finally, Lewis Graven was looking like his old self again. The next 2 months would see a slow but encouraging rise of the Championship table into mid-table, and would see quite a few draws along the way in the month of November. Every single one of those draws were encouraging. They were all good performances. And besides 2 back-to-back defeats against Borough and Huddersfield in December, before that we'd beaten Hull, Peterborough, and absolutely destroyed Cooper's old side 4-1. And that, for me, that game, in my opinion anyway, was a huge moment in the season, because that's when we moved into the top 10 just 3 months after being bottom of the league, and we were doing it in style. It was no fluke. It was not a honeymoon anymore. We were looking a really dangerous team. In January, we saw the recruitment yet again on point. Again, what's happening here? We have a competent CEO and manager, and it's working. We saw a fantastic, vastly experienced centre-back in Steve Cook join, obviously to help out, now playing a 3 at the back formation. We'd see Jonathan Panzer come in more for the future, but looked like a really good, young, exciting player. Also Richard Larea from Canada, wouldn't play too much, but still a good option. And the big ones really, besides Cook, Sam Surridge and Keenan Davis. Both of them didn't have the best goal records before they were at Forest, but my God, they were both fantastic for the rest of the season. Like Taylor going out on loan, Carl Jenkinson and Jack Carvalho finally being sold because it was clearly was not going to work for him. On the pitch in January anyway, we beat Derby 2-1. Of course, easy, they were a small team. We also beat Arsenal, tactically outclassed Arsenal 1-0. And really, besides the slip-up away at Cardiff at the end of January, for the rest of the season, Forest would only lose 2 games in the next 17 matches. And my God, when I say we can now score goals, we can now score goals. Would score 4 goals against Reading, West Brom, Blackpool, 5 goals against Swansea, beating his old side 9-2 on aggregate. Cooper's old side, of course. A fantastic result away at already promoted Fulham, 1-0 win, a defensive masterclass from the entire team. And I want to mention before this, we drew with Stoke 2-2, and that for me said everything because we didn't win that game. But the mentality said everything about how Cooper had changed this side. We were losing 2-1 with hardly any time left. We had Joe Wall playing in net because Brice Samba had been sent off, and we still found a way to get something from the game. The never say die attitude was so powerful, and around this time we were also involved in an incredible FA Cup run. Going back to the Fulham game in the league, we really were starting to believe that maybe top 2 was doable. We'd now sealed the playoffs for the first time since 2011. Unfortunately, one of those 2 defeats out of 17 did come against Bournemouth, the other one being against Luton. And both those defeats were quite dubious because we had a goal ruled out against Luton, which we shouldn't have had ruled out, and Bournemouth, we should have had a penalty really. We'd go on to finish 4th place in the Championship and would have to play Sheffield United in the playoffs. We would win 2-1 away at Bramall Lane. Jack Colback and Brennan Johnson getting the goals, unfortunately Sander Berg getting a goal back towards the end, meaning the Forest were in the driving seat going into the final leg. Brennan Johnson scored again. What an incredible season he had, by the way, 19 goals in all competitions. He scored in this game and it looked like it was game over. And I've got to give credit to Sheffield United, they did not give up one bit. They came out immediately, and I've never seen a team attack us like that. And ultimately they pegged us back to 3-3, taking it to extra time, taking it to penalties. And when Keenan Davis came on just before the final whistle, we did see an improvement, but we could not get it done in the actual game. Penalties, no problem. Brice Samba's in there. He saved 3 penalties and Forest went through to the playoff final, the first appearance at Wembley in over 20 years. We would have to play Huddersfield Town for a 4th time in one season, and ultimately we outclassed them. The game wasn't the best. To be quite honest, say outclassed, we weren't the best. Huddersfield didn't really turn up, but ultimately we got the job done. And there we go. That is the story of how Forest got promoted back to the Premier League under Evangelos Marinakis' tenure at the club. Steve Cooper, living legend. He united a broken city, a broken team, a broken fan base. He made crap players or mediocre players good, or at the very least useful. He made he made the great players even better. He was playing midfielders out of position and they were playing like they've been playing there the entire career. Unbelievable season, and one I'll never forget, ever. And we now, for the first time since 1999, have a Premier League season to look forward to, and it's all about staying there now. And under the ownership of Evangelos Marinakis, the recruitment of Cooper, and particularly Murphy, the management of Cooper, we couldn't be in any better hands. If you've enjoyed this long video, but I've really enjoyed putting it together, then please hit the like button, subscribe to Rads if you're new. Of course, I've got more videos coming in the near future, but please stay tuned to Rads, and I shall see you very, very soon. Up the bloody Reds.